Well, how's it going, Riverview? Hope you're all doing well this week. Pastor Tony here to share really one more thing with you from our study of the book of Joshua. So this past weekend, we looked in depth at Joshua chapter 6 and the conquest of Jericho by the Israelites. And in that chapter, we saw that God had given his people assurance of what would happen if they acted in faithful obedience to his word. In chapter 6, verse 2, God tells Joshua that he has already handed him the city, its king, and the soldiers over to him and the rest of God's people. So what Joshua and the people were to do was to act in faithful obedience to his word and carry out the plan that God had for them. So today we're actually going to spend some time going back in chapter 5 because we see God do something really powerful as he prepares to fulfill his promise to his people. But before we do that, it's going to be really helpful for us to go back and remember what happened years before. And you can actually read about all this in the book of Exodus. So the Jewish people, they had been enslaved in Egypt for about 400 years. And God had raised up a leader named Moses to lead these people out of slavery and into the promised land. And God was going to do this by sending plagues on Egypt to show them that he was truly God. And the last plague was this angel of the Lord moving through Egypt and killing every firstborn son. And the only homes that the angel would pass over were the ones that followed God's instruction of killing a lamb and wiping its blood on the doorposts. So Jewish people would continue to do this every year, and they would call it Passover because that's what happened, right? This is how God freed them from slavery in Egypt. The Jewish people would do it every year to remember how God acted that night to free them. And after this, God does this amazing thing in parting the Red Sea so that God's people can pass through while the Egyptians perish behind them. These two miracles really showed that God was with them. But after this, God's people left Egypt and they began to grumble. For 40 years, the Israelites, they wander around in the wilderness really because of their disobedience. The people sinned against God. Moses disobeyed direct instruction from God. And so none of that generation would enter the promised land. But once those people died, this younger generation of God's people, Joshua included, they would be able to enter. God continued to provide for the people as they wandered through the wilderness by giving them manna. This was food he would provide every single day so they never starved. But then we get to chapter 5 of the book of Joshua, where we see God stop and renew his covenant with them. And we actually see this happen in two specific ways. The first thing that happens is that all the men are circumcised. And now circumcision was something that God had the Jewish people do to set them apart from everyone else. And as they wandered in the wilderness for these 40 years, they didn't carry out that command. So God has them do this before they enter the promised land. But there's another thing they didn't do in the wilderness, and that was celebrate the Passover. As they spent time waiting to enter the promised land, they didn't continue in remembering what God had done for them by celebrating Passover. But now in chapter 5, for just the third time in their history, God has them do this. He has them celebrate Passover. They look back to 40 years ago and they remember how God worked in a miraculous way to free them, to bring them to this point in their history on the verge of the promised land. I want to take some time to look at what it says in Joshua chapter 5, verses 10 through 12. It says this: while the Israelites camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, they observed the Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month. The day after Passover, they ate unleavened bread and roasted grain from the produce of the land. And the day after they ate from the produce of the land, the manna ceased. Since there was no more manna for the Israelites, they ate from the crops of the land of Canaan that year. Now, we see something really cool here. There's a really cool parallel in something that had happened years before. Back in Egypt, the people celebrated Passover, and then God kept his promise to defeat their enemies and free them. The Egyptians perished in the Red Sea. Now here, they celebrate the Passover right before God will do the same thing. He's going to keep his promise. He's going to defeat their enemies at Jericho, and he's going to bring them into the promised land. See, there's something really powerful happening here in Joshua 5. The Israelites do the things that God commanded them to do as his people. And in that obedience, they also would have remembered the ways God had fought for them years ago. See, there's great power in remembering the things that God has done in our lives. One of the most powerful things we can do in our faith in the present is looking back to the faithfulness of God and how he's worked in our past. So there's something I want you to do this week. I want you to take some time and I want you to answer this question. I want you to think about this. Where have you seen God's faithfulness in your life? I mean, look back at the years of your life, even before you were a Christian. How has God worked in your life in powerful ways? After you think about those moments, those memories, I want you to write them down. Put them somewhere where you can go back and you can reference them and you can remember how God has demonstrated his love for you. I mean, first, just think about the time that you became a Christian, how you turned from your sin and you trusted in Jesus' death on the cross for your sin. I mean, that is a time when possibly God worked the most powerfully in your life. I think one of the best ways we can do this is just telling stories, to remember times and seasons where God moved and reminded you of his power and his presence in your life. Don't keep those stories to yourself. Tell those stories to others. Hear their stories and be mutually encouraged by one another's faith. I mean, this is what happened with the Passover. They would carry it out as they did in Egypt, the night the angel moved through the city. And as they carried out Passover, they would tell the story of what happened, how God saved them, and that remembering is what strengthened them. See, this is what is happening in Joshua chapter 5. God had already begun miraculously bringing his people into the promised land, but in the midst of all of it, he has them stop, he has them carry out the Passover, and he has them remember. Remembering what God has done in our lives in the past is one of the best things we can do as followers of Jesus to strengthen us for the present and for the future. Do you have a rhythm of remembering God's faithfulness in your life? In the midst of this season, I would encourage you to take time to stop and remember the tangible ways that God has worked in your life. List them out, tell the stories, pray, and thank him for his faithfulness. And then from that remembering, continue to pursue him today in faith as a follower of Jesus. I hope this encouraged you today, and my prayer is that you continue to be encouraged by the work God is doing in your life and through our Riverview church family. Love you all. God bless.